think that nootropics can provide several benefits that are incredibly valuable to society. We think it can benefit all kinds of people, and we think it can also prevent the harm of abuse that we're seeing today in the status quo. And on our side of the House, that's why we're so proud to be proposing this motion before the House today. So before I start going into our constructive case, which will consist of firstly society, and then secondly of these disabled people, and then thirdly, which my laudable colleague will discuss, this idea of abuse, I'm quickly going to go into some quick definitions and lay out the debate before we today. So first of all, we're going to be defining this House as Western liberal democracies. We're going to be saying that nootropics are a drug that boosts mental capacity. It allows people to focus more. It allows people to exercise the capacity they already have more. And what we would say on our side of the House is we're basically enabling doctors to be prescribing nootropics to people they feel either need it or feel they can really benefit from this above 18 that thank you are going to be using this for either academic work or taking academic courses or doing schooling or are actually doing professional work that requires cognitive capacity. So in addition to that, sure.
In the status quo, doctors can already prescribe to people, for example, with ADHD who need it. How is your model any different from those?
Because we're also including this idea that people that can actually really benefit this from work that, for example, academic work and work that actually requires cognitive capacity. So we're actually allowing this for people that can really benefit this as well from this as well in terms of that kind of field as well. So not only people who are meant for this area. So we're also going to be ensuring that the government is going to be having tight regulation of the drug, ensuring that drug companies are being responsible, ensuring that these drugs are being prescribed properly, and ensuring that these drugs aren't being actually abused. We'd be using mechanisms that we use in the status quo to ensure that. So let's go into this first idea about why we think it's really beneficial for society. Okay, so we think that society is one where we have a lot of academic work, where a lot of the time we see a lot of the fields of work is a lot of academic work, and we think that what we see nootropics does is it ensures that you can boost mental capacity and you can really speed up this work. So what are several benefits of this? We think from this we see a more efficient, faster working society that can actually be able to do things faster and much more efficiently. Which means as a whole society is able to go through things faster. And there's kind of two benefits. Firstly, at the very higher level of academics, and secondly from day-to-day society. So firstly at the very higher level of academics. So when you're looking at things like innovation, like cutting-edge technology, it requires a lot of thinking, it requires a lot of work to get to those kinds of ends and get to those kinds of conclusions and get to those kinds of innovations. So when you take these drugs, what we would say is that it kind of speeds up this process and allows for these innovations, we think to be happening much faster and these innovations to be coming to society much faster. And we think we just generally increase the amount of production of these kinds of innovations and changes within society. But additionally, what we would say is that for day-to-day society, it does the same kind of thing, it increases the efficiency of everything and it ensures that society benefits from this. So we think that as a whole, nootropics is something that really is beneficial to society, and we think that's a benefit that we see on our side of the House today. So let's look at people in general. Because in the status quo, first of all, not all countries allow these nootropics to be given to disabled people. But in addition to that, doctors are really tight on which kinds of people with mental disabilities can take nootropics. For example, they allow specific people with high levels of ADD to be taking nootropics. But when we see a lot of people who have concentration issues or are really bad at taking tests because they get a lot of stress or pressure, for these people, they don't have access to nootropics, right? Even though they often have a lot of mental capacity, right? Even though they're really smart, when they're in that kind of situation, they really mentally break down and they're not able to concentrate properly. So what we would say is that, these are people that we really try to help a lot within society today. We see programs such as, special needs programs within schools to try to help out these people. And we think the government is really obligated to help out these people a lot because they were born with these kinds of problems with the luck of the dice, right? It's not like they were purposely doing something so they got these problems. So I think it's our responsibility as a government to be trying to help these people who have these kinds of problems. So when they are able to take these drugs, what we would say is it allows them to be able to, survive under those like really stressful conditions, those test conditions, and be able to be much more successful within society. Sure.
You're not allowing this drug to be taken under 18, so how will it help any of these children that actually have to take these school tests and have to live with this concentration problem for the whole life?
There are a lot of people over 18 that also have these problems. Like, these are often lifelong problems that exist. There are things like called university where people can take it there. Like, we think the reason why we're doing it over 18 is because we think like children, can't not always necessarily consent to this, and like parents can often coerce them to be taking these kinds of drugs. So that said, why is it okay for the government to be allowing this to happen? Why is this like the government's role to be allowing these drugs? First of all, what we'd say is that like within the kind of society today, within like the kind of laissez-faire society that we live in today, where capitalist governments, or really the most common governments that we see, it's often the government's role to let the economy run, to let people do whatever they can to make money and to let society run. And that's why we think, first of all, the government has a role and obligation to to allow people to do what they can to get the money, and we think that this is a really big mechanism in which they can do that. But in addition to that, we already talked to you earlier about why some people really need these drugs. We think it's really important for the government to be allowing this. And ladies and gentlemen, we think all in all, it's the government's role to ensure that people have the ability to do what they can to make a living, and that's why we think it's not the government's place to say no to drugs. So because we realize that there are huge tangible benefits, and as my partner is going to explain, there are huge abuse problems in the first place, and because we also think it's principally justified, we are very proud to propose this.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much to the member of the Open Government, the Prime Minister. I would like to now call the leader of the opposition.
Thank you for the floor, Mr. Speaker. We as opening opposition say that this motion actually supports physical and mental impairment in the short and long term. I will explain this by my first argument, which is how we distort the natural capabilities of human being, and how this is a slippery slope to a society where performance is all that matters and not so much how you benefit and live your life. So let me first do some rebutting what the previous speaker said. He said we need lots of academic work, we need a fast and efficient society so we can have innovation and better society. And we do this via drugs. Well, this is a mechanism, the drug mechanism is a mechanism for the short term. But what comes along with drug use is always that there's an independence created. And a dependence cannot be sustained on the long term because there's also negative physical side effects that come along with drugs. So drug use can never be sustained for the long term. So these innovations that government are stating are not for the long term, just for the short term. Secondly, he says people have the performance anxiety, and they got this from the luck of the dice. Well, the thing is, you can take drugs to clear this problem, or you can just do this via natural learning. Learn how to deal with your anxiety, and this is also, again, a long-term solution, because drug use, again, is just short-term. You will make yourself dependent on drugs for your entire life, and my partner will explain this a little bit more. Then we have a laissez-faire society where people need to do whatever they can to get their means met. And what's he actually saying? That you should support people harming themselves, because what drugs eventually lead to is, again, dependence, and I will explain the exact harms in my constructive. But the government also has an obligation to protect society via social laws. They should protect people from harming themselves. And if drugs have the ability to harm you, you should be protected from those, and therefore the government shouldn't support this. So let me first explain why this distorts the natural capabilities of human beings. Because what we see is that you can handle everything in a natural learning process. You can learn to concentrate, you can learn to be patient, and you can learn to be decisive. And drugs are just a short-term solution to actually get the end goal of being able to operate in your environment. And this is something, yes.
If that really is the case that we can depend on our own natural abilities, why do we then develop robots, computers to do the course for us?
The thing is between I enhancing myself of doing an excellent job via drugs creates an impairment later on. If I create a robot who functions for me, it can operate outside of me and has no negative effects on me, but the drugs have negative effects on me. So what we do is that we create artificial human beings who artificially enhance themselves via drugs. And this creates a physical mental dependence. First physical, because your performance is dependent on the drugs. If you take the performance away, in effect you can't perform the same way. I wouldn't, for example, I took a couple of cups of coffee before I started this debate because I can perform better. It is allowed by society to have coffee, but I could also have some stronger drugs, like for example Adderall, to perform even more. But could I do debating then without the drugs? Probably not, because my performance now is dependent on this drug. So I could only start to keep using more and more drugs to enhance my performance in debating. Well, actually I should have learned how to debate in a natural way. And you only become more and more dependent because you always want to achieve your best. This also creates a mental impairment because your start off point is you are performing with drugs. And if you take those away, you create a natural deprivation, because you now have a performance anxiety, because I know I can't perform because I don't have these drugs. I can't function in society, society won't accept me because I don't have these drugs. I've already showed what I can do with drugs, and now society says show it again, but I can't because I can't use these drugs. So I will only become more and more dependent. So this is a slippery slope we're on, because capitalism is based on performance and excellence through competition. And this competition mechanism will only want you to show your top performance. And this top performance can only be done by using these drugs. So what this will happen is that within a society you create this this incentive among all people to use drugs because they need to perform at their best. For example, in America, to get rid of depression, they take Prozac instead of actually going to some counseling and taking care of your depression. You take Prozac to artificially get rid of your problem, when the problem is not really can't really be solved by drugs. And in this situation, there's not even a competition mechanism which incentivizes people to take more and more and perform better and better and better. So when you take those drugs away, you actually, what you're creating is a lot of anxiety, not in yourself, but also among all that are in society. But also then happens is that the performance is actually a means to create a happiness for yourself, create a situation for yourself. And if you are dependent upon drugs, the performance becomes the goal instead of the performance helping you and assisting you. So for these reasons, that we should naturally learn how to have our use our abilities, and this is a slippery slope onto more and more drug use, I beg you to oppose.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I'd like to call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue.
Instead of trying to stop a problem by simply just standing and hiding from it, we tell you to stand up and address it as a whole. And that's pretty much the essence of my main point, which I'm going to be introducing today, that of abuse, which we prevent with this resolution. But firstly, I'm going to look at what our opponents tried to say today in response to my first speaker's arguments, but also for their own substantive. So firstly, how did they respond to my first speaker's material? Now they respond to his idea of how this benefits society and how it benefits individuals who have, anxiety or learning disabilities. And they actually acknowledge that this is beneficial in the short term. Then they kind of made this vague statement about the long term and said, oh, it creates this dependence. And I think what they mean, ladies and gentlemen, I'm trying to look at this in the best case scenario, is that it's addictive. So they're saying, it's going to become addictive for these individuals. But ladies and gentlemen, what we say to that is we allow certain prescribed drugs that are addictive. Painkillers, for example, in large doses can be addictive too. But that's why we, give doctors and entrust doctors with the responsibility of taking care of their patients, making sure they're not overusing it to a point where the patients have negative side effects due to a dependence. And that's what we've done in our model, ladies and gentlemen. We felt like we dealt with that. And then they also tried to come here and say, oh, well, people who have anxiety can just, deal with it by learning to deal with their anxiety. I don't think they really understand what anxiety, what having those learning disabilities is like. It's not so easy. You can't just learn it, and most therapy programs today involve the use of, actually learning, talking to therapists, but they also involve prescribed drugs. We think they're not being ideal here. Now, they also tried to rebut our capitalism point by saying, well, capitalism is about competition with natural abilities. Now, our first inherent problem is here, ladies and gentlemen, is that we think they're focusing on the wrong actor. We're not talking about we're talking about the companies when we're talking about capitalism and whatnot. But even if they weren't focusing on the wrong actor, come on guys. Companies use robots, they use computers. That's the age we live in. We don't think that it's such an ideal world like sad opposition. Now let me also look at the points they tried to make. So the first one, they talked about how this distorts from natural capabilities and natural ability. Now we don't actually think it completely does, ladies and gentlemen, right? Because what these drugs do is they don't boost your IQ or anything like that. They just boost your ability to use that IQ. They boost things like your focus, they take away anxiety, other stuff. And we don't think we think there's a distinction between the two. And we also see, once again, they live in an ideal world. In sports, for example, we're allowed to use, Tiger Woods got surgery to improve his eyesight. People are using really performance-enhancing equipments. They can use painkillers. We think they ultimately live in an ideal world. And that's also kind of how I addressed their second point, because they said we're going to move along a slippery slope to a society where performance doesn't matter anymore. But that's kind of already where we are right now. Once again, they don't understand the world we live in, where we have robots, computers, and athletes who can use equipment. Actually, I'll take you.
Yeah, so you're saying we are supporting an ideal world, or actually you say, well, the natural world isn't good enough. You have to create this ideal of enhanced enhanced by drugs. How do you explain yourself?
No, I said what I'm saying is I think it fits within how the world works. I think it fits within how the world works in that the world isn't based on only performance and natural ability. We do things that enhance our performance, like using computers, like using robots. I didn't think it was taking it too far. That's what I'm saying. Now let me proceed into my substantive and my point on abuse. And so the main premise here, the main claim, ladies and gentlemen, is that we end abuse within the status quo. So right now, ladies and gentlemen, what How is the use of nootropics dealt with? Well, it's banned, except in certain prescribed cases, as the closing opposition agreed with when he asked the POI. It's only given to people who have, say, ADHD, and it's very, and my first speaker tried to make a point of how doctors are very careful about giving it to people, and that's why he, went off on that idea of benefits. But anyways, so it's only given in certain cases. But ladies and gentlemen, people have shown a huge willingness to still use these drugs, to still abuse these drugs, and use them to performance enhancing. Now, what's the inherent problem here? When the government isn't controlling it, and when people are just getting it into their own hands through, getting it from their friends, etc. The problem is we don't know how much those people are taking. The problem is that these drugs that they're taking have been passed down, and they can get laced with other drugs, increasing the harms, ladies and gentlemen. And the problem is it can often get into the hands of very young kids, which means it can have even more increasing effects on those kids' health, ladies and gentlemen. And sometimes they won't consult their doctors, so they might have a certain medical condition that causes them to have an increased harm with a particular drug. No, sit down please. And this can result in very terrible harms, in death. People have died from taking these drugs. We're Team Canada A. We're actually from Vancouver. Just 2 months ago, ladies and gentlemen, 4 kids were hospitalized because they took Adderall and it was laced with other drugs. Adderall is among the 10 most abused drugs, according to the British National Institute of Drug Prevention. And ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, our claim here is that we feel people are going to be using these drugs anyways, so we actually do better by accepting that fact than dealing with it, trying to regulate it, control it, and reduce the harms. And that's why today, along with what my first speaker and my Prime Minister outlined in his case, why we beg to propose. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the floor, Mr. Speaker. So, actually in my speech I'm going to talk about 2 main points. And these are why life is a learning process and why drugs distort this. And secondly, why a performance society is not an ideal society and how this will only reinforce that. And my third point will also be some practical negative side effects of this. Okay, first some rebuttal on the last speaker. So actually what he was saying in the last part of his speech was that because there is abuse, we should actually legalize it. Because there are people who are taking overdoses, who are too young and get drugs, we should totally allow it. Well, we think that the effect is very simple. When you make it easier to get access to that drug, more people, when you make it easier to get that drug, only more people will get it. And they will also more spread it among their friends. And there will be no regulation at all because you don't know to who friends they give it. The problem will only be bigger. So because there is abuse, you can't just say allow it and we'll hope that it has good ends. No, it will only get worse and easier to get. Yeah. The second point is that let's see. Well, actually, he was. This brings me to my point about performance society. He was trying to set this ideal picture in which, because of the use of these drugs, there will be a more efficient society, more innovations, things like that. But what we see in reality, why do people use drugs? They do that because of very egoistic reasons. They do that because they are very insecure. They do that because they want to have a good grade. They do that because they think to have to work harder at the job, not to be more creative. So what we're going to see is that people indeed are going to use more of these drugs, but they do that only because of insecurity. And they do that because they feel that they have to perform in the society and that they have to use more and more to compete with their colleagues, with their other students. And what we will see, you will see that even the people who actually don't need this drug who could perform without this drug, because of this insecurity, because of this easy access, are going to use it. The weaker students, the weaker working people are also going to use it, so it will be widely spread, it will be normalized, so in the end the effect will be zero, because all these people are using this, everybody is stressed, everybody is working itself over, so you won't be in a better position. So therefore we think that because of this normalization, people will overuse it and in the end will not achieve a higher position because everybody does use it. Okay, then to come to my second point, which is about that life is a learning process. My colleague already stated the beginning of it. What we think that abilities like concentration, patience, learn how to deal with pressure, these are not abilities that you have from your birth. These are abilities that you have to learn, have to develop. When you were 12, probably you were much more impatient than you were now. But why did you become more patient? Why did you get more concentration? Because you allowed yourself to make mistakes. You saw that in certain situations, this concentration, this dealing of learning how to deal with pressure, you learned these abilities by coping with it. By using this drug, you're actually skipping this whole learning process. You do indeed on short term get more concentration, but this is only a short-term effect. So, like in your adult life, you have never you've never confronted these problems, how to concentrate, how to deal with pressure. No, you use that drug. So at an adult age, you will be less developed in this sense, and only have these abilities when you keep on using these drugs. And what are the practical implications of using these drugs? Well, my colleague already stated most of it. One, you get addicted. So you need more and more to have the same effect. You can even get resistant. When you get resistant and that drug doesn't work anymore for you, well, that does something with your self-esteem. Because now now out of nothing, you don't get this focus, you don't get this maybe even social qualities. You've become resistant, the drugs doesn't work anymore, and you skipped the whole learning process. So actually where you're standing is that you're in a very insecure situation. You don't have the professional qualities that you could have had at that age, and the thing that gave you those qualities doesn't work anymore because you overused it, because it was normalized, and because it was allowed by first proposition. So what we're actually really afraid of is that in this performance society, which we think is already too much, we think that with allowing this drug, we're sending the signal: if you want to survive, if you want to achieve something, well, you need some extra step for this. And we think that by saying that people naturally don't have the qualities to perform, you make them insecure, and you make them really dependent on them. Are there any POIs? No? Okay, then I go on. Okay, so what we see is that because you skip this learning process, okay, go on.
If they were already so insecure in the status quo, if they already had these kinds of problems, wouldn't they have already gone the distance to like attain these drugs illegally in the status quo?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. Well, we think that if you are insecure, you should cope with these problems. The only way to as I already stated, to develop is to make these mistakes and to get feedback from a teacher, from a parent. You should talk with other people. That's the solution. The solution is not an artificial way. No, you should get feedback from other people on your performances, and with that feedback you can enhance yourself and naturally, in a long term, have more self-confidence. When you can only debate while using drugs, well, that still doesn't give you that self-esteem because you know that you're dependent. So what we just want to say, we think that this performance society is there, we find that a pity, but with these drugs you only enhance it, you reinforce this pressure, You skip a whole learning process, and there are practical implications like abduction, like addiction that will still exist even more when you allow this. So for all these reasons, please oppose.
Can I close this door?
Just going to ask for some clarification from the CA.
We'll continue.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much to the opening opposition. And that brings us to the end of the opening half of the debate. We'd now like to have some issues from the closing half, starting with the leader of government, member of government.
Okay, so in my speech today, I will be going over and contending the most important points we have seen in this debate, and then I will be providing my own extensions for the favor of this motion to be passed. So let's go on and contend a few points. Firstly, I will start with what we heard around this debate. We heard that there's a problem of dependence and depending on the drug. But then they said that it was okay if they improve our disabilities as long as they do not harm ourselves, as long as they do not harm our physical bodies, and as long as they do not cater our abilities as so. So therefore, I'll tackle this right now. And I make the analogy opening government started with, and analogous to the painkillers. Because when painkillers were introduced, at the end of the 19th century, we were all fearful of them, and we all saw that the effects they had were very weird, and the effects they had might be detrimental to society. We saw that we might be able to become dependent on them and not be able to perform without them. And we thought that this would all change our behavior in a very detrimental way. But when we allowed for doctors to prescribe these painkillers, and when we allowed them to set criteria and to define exactly to which people they would give them to, we learned which types of were the more severe, which types of painkillers had more harms, which type of people which type of people were more prone to getting affected by others. And essentially, when we got the painkillers out to the service and we were allowed to prescribe them to people, we saw that the violence and that the proneness to dependence went very much down. And we see this with all types of drugs, and even the nootropics. If we put them into society, people will learn to control them, doctors will learn how to prescribe them, and as a whole, we'll be able to control them as a whole. And then we heard the other point that learning disabilities can be catered by themselves. And they said that a person that takes these drugs and then later doesn't take them and performs will be reluctant to be put into society because of his performance. But I will say that it is much worse for an adult human being to have to cope with being bipolar, or to have to cope with always having ADHD impairments, all the way in society for his entire life because of the way he was born. I think that in that way, if he shows these disabilities of him, he will be more prone to be ostracized by society. And therefore, by giving him these painkillers and by giving him the nootropics and by allowing him to show what type of person he can be without these disabilities, we'll be making that person a favor more than if we let him to be with the disabilities he had forever. And now then they talked about how the abuse would emancipate if we would allow of these drugs, if we would allow society for them to be legal. Now let's look at what type of people would be using these drugs. It won't be those that don't care about school. It won't be the type of people with labor-intensive work. Why? Because a labor-intensive worker will not have his mental ability, will not want to be more passionate, will not want to be more able to concentrate. These things will not matter to him, and therefore he won't be the type of person taking these drugs. Now, what type of people will actually take these drugs? The people that will take these drugs will be people that work in mentally hard labor, such as in scientific fields, in informatic technology, where the people have to mentally focus on countless problems and fix the countless problems together. Now, why is this good? Because these people will more essentially have gone through education of a higher basis, they will have gone through more years of education, and as a result, the school courses they will have taken will give them a much greater insight to what effects the drug might have and what ramifications might come as a result of the drug. Therefore, by allowing it out into society, we will tell people that it is okay to take them, and the labor force intensive workers that will not know what to do with the drug will be less prone to abuse it and not know about the effects. I'll take over.
Don't you think that the people who are in hardcore academics and computer technology, we already have a mechanism for that, and that's natural selection, and we don't want to naturally enhance people and then impair them for a long-term process.
Thank you very much.
Natural selection can take care of this kind of stuff.
Thank you very much. On the point of natural selection, this moves me to my next point of contention, that natural selection and the way the natural mechanisms work in our society are not sufficient, and we see that we do fight against these mechanisms. We fight against these mechanisms by creating computer programs to do work for us, by catering robots to do the work for us. And why will it then therefore be good to allow nootropics? Because people today see that we still know more of how humans work than robots. We still know more how to deal with problems than robots and computer programs. And therefore, by letting the people to use the nootropics, we will allow them to work much better. And also they talked about how people will learn to cope with their disabilities. But I've already dealt with this. However, I will once more say that we do allow, when a person breaks their bone or when he has a fracture somewhere in his skin, we do allow them to take morphine. We do allow them to take we do allow them to take drugs that are prone for addiction. However, since these morphine and these drugs were allowed into society, we saw the doctors learn more in which doses they were supposed to prescribe. The patients know how to use them, and therefore we'll see a much lesser field of abuse. Now moving over to my extensions. And I will have two extensions in this debate. Firstly, how it will improve the academics for adults, and secondly, how it will increase the equality in access to nootropics as a whole. So on to my first point. It will now. When an adult goes into education, and when an adult older than 18 wants to educate and take more school courses, what really depletes him of what he can do is the motivation he has, the passion he has, and the attention he needs to give it. Because when we grew up, it is not many 18-year-olds together with us in the school, and therefore motivation is a key part and a key element to allowing these people to go into education. So by allowing these nootropics to these people, we will eventually equal out the society and allow adults who have not yet been able to go through education under the 18 to have the same opportunity and go through the education as a whole. Why is this good? This is good because society will then be much more largely equalized, and we will see. No, thank you, and we will see that it will be much easier to hold up the society. And moving on to my second point of contention, that people will have an equal access to them. Today, the nootropics that are abused are either abused or they are bought by people that have enough money to buy them or that very easily can take them. But we say that when we introduce these nootropics into society, it will have the same effect as painkillers did. Over a longer period of time, we will see that the painkillers will go down in price because people will be able to use them, and we will also see that the people will learn how the nootropics work, and it will have a good effect. So what will happen is that everyone will be able to access them, and everyone will have will be able to enjoy them equally as a whole. So because of these two reasons, that is why we should allow nootropics.
Thank you very much to the member of government, the member of opposition.
Yeah, no suit for you, bro.
Yeah, I have to open the... Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, I will start with 3 points of contention. Firstly, around the model. Secondly, what is actually better for humans as a whole. And lastly, what is better for education as a whole. So firstly, the model. I would really like a bunch of points of clarifications on this because I have no idea what team proposition is trying to do here. We've seen that firstly, we're going to ban the use of them under 18, but at the same time, in the status quo, children with ADHD can use them. So are they now limiting the use of the drug, or are they doing more of the drug? Secondly, are doctors now prescribing them to all the humans, or who exactly decides who gets the drug? We would like more clarification on this, because firstly they say that, well, it's only for the people that need it, only for concentration problems. Who decides this? Who can you go to a doctor and say, like, doctor, I can really study for a test, it's really hard, can you get it then? Because then basically anyone can get it. Who decides who actually gets the drugs? Are we going to make it more open? Because right now it just looks at the status quo to me. And this way you're not helping anyone, and your entire abuse argument doesn't stand either. But I'll go on to that in my second point of clarification, second point of contention. So what eventually, I'll take.
Okay, sir, so this debate is specifically about professional and academic usage. So this wouldn't be affecting the status quo in terms of ADHD and people with like mental disorders in that area.
Okay, so children are still allowed to take the drug, the ADHD drug. We have to make that clear because we definitely said ban it under 18. Okay, so still the question arises, who in the professional field can actually use it? Is it only people with problems? So they have, who exactly is it? But you know what, I'll just assume things and I'll go on to my second point of contention, which is what exactly is better for humans. Well, what we see in here is two sides. Firstly, team opposition beautifully explained to us why it would decrease mental capabilities of all humans, also if you use it under 18, also if you use it above 18. And then we have seen on team opposition that will actually help people who have problems right now to deal with that and to actually go into that. But only in the field of, for example, a scientist or someone who already works in higher up in the food chain. So that begs me the question, how do these people get into the scientific field if they have such problems learning? How would this work in the first place? How would they get there if they couldn't have used the drug before? This is a problem in your entire model because you do not get any of this benefit of actually education if these people couldn't have done it in the first place. Team proposition, however, we have very clearly explained to you why it doesn't work this way. Why if you take drugs, more and more drugs, and I assume team proposition wants to open up the drug field in this, because that's also what their extension speaker said. We see that we will get development, because how does the brain develop? Once you use it, it starts building up. And if you now take a drug and it will make the connections for you, you will not build up this brain structure that you need to actually concentrate. We do see that 9-year-olds are much, much worse at concentration. They go all over the place. And once we actually are 18, we see that we get some kind of level and we can actually concentrate now. So yes, there is this entire idea still works. What they then came up and said was that, well, we'll just prescribe to people that can only, we'll just prescribe it to some people and not to other people. Again, there is this huge problem with their model of guidance. What is not actually give this to anyone? And if you give it to anyone, you actually have this problem of the tolerance, you have this problem that brain connections won't be made. And this is not just because under 18, because latest estimates, our brain keeps on developing until 28. So we still have 10 years of brain development that will be lowered if we use this drug. Okay, so there's also this idea of independence and tolerance. They just said that, yeah, well, there will be prescriptions, and there will be less abuse. We would really like some development on how easily, sir, go ahead.
Why is it the government's role to say you need to prioritize the long-term development over the short-term? If someone really needs to get through university and it's really important for them to do that, then why is it the government's place to tell them, no, you need to really care about your long-term development more than your short-term?
Well, what my proposition team clearly lined out is that we have the government protecting its people from themselves. Because this dependence doesn't have to be over 10 years of using it. This is very tricky. All the time we use this drug, we are stopping our brain from developing. That is the problem. So, if you use it throughout your entire academic career, you will not have developed the concentration skills you will need. And you also said that you will need to have a lack of concentration skills in the first place to use it. So you're not actually solving anything with concentration. You might have people using it that actually don't need it and might actually develop this concentration in a later stage. Now stopping that entire development by taking the drug. And you'll have to continue taking it. And there's also this idea of tolerance, which is also very true. If you take it many times, if you want to go through your entire academic career using it, there will definitely be tolerance. This happens with every drug, also the drugs like aspirin, morphine that was brought up by your extension speaker. No, thank you, sir. Then there's this idea that the drug will actually get better. Well, this is entirely flawed, because it's not true that painkillers got better once we actually started giving to everyone. This is not how it works. You cannot just prescribe drugs to people that you have no idea how they actually work. You cannot just open the doors and then get what we want. No, we first have to have animal proof. We first have to have an entire R&D process that actually develops the drugs, sees if it's safe, human testing, and then we can produce it to the outside. That's how drug development works. We cannot just open up. And yes, there are going to be cases of people getting drugs that they do not need, they do not work with them. So what team proposition is, no thank you sir, what proposition is suggesting is that by giving a lot of drugs, we're actually going to get, there's going to be a lot of failures, but from the failures we're going to learn. We do not want this at all. No thank you sir. We say these drugs are dangerous, we should control them. So now to my extension, which is based on 2 points. Firstly, a morally wrong argument, and firstly how it will stop the development of society, and it will slow it down. So firstly, why is this morally wrong? Well, it's very simple. Adderall is a very expensive drug. Not everyone can use it, and this is just the case of it. So what we see is that people who have more money can actually use this drug now, while people on the lower type of the food chain with less money are not able to use it. This is a huge inequity. No, thank you, sir. Inequity. We do not see in this today's society. You have to have ADHD. You have to have some genetic backdrop to actually use the drug instead of opening it up. So we just have a huge gap again, where people who are rich can actually use the drug and get better, and the people who are poor cannot get out of this because the people with the money and can actually afford Adderall will just keep on going up. What we also see is that we're forcing everyone to take the drug in this case. No, thank you, sir. What team opposition already suggested was that we'll actually, we'll have a performance society where everyone will have to take the drug to keep up, and the net gain will not be there. Well, this is entirely not fair. What if you do not want to take drugs? What if you do not want to slow down your mental capabilities and your process of development? But however, all the people around you are using it, and if you want to have that promotion, then you're going to have to use the drug, otherwise you cannot keep up. This is a huge problem. We're actually forcing people to take a drug to actually keep up with the rest of society. Then there's the idea of development of society, and we say we like stupid people. We like people that do not concentrate, that cannot focus on academic careers, because we need these people. We need these people to be on the streets helping, we need these people to plumb, we need these people to be electricians. These people are also necessary. And if we now allow everyone to have this huge mental capability, we're just going to stop society from progressing. We're not going to have a lower bound. We're only going to have an upper bound of people who can actually use the drug. We're not going to have plumbers. We're not going to have electricians. And this is a huge problem for society if we want it to function. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the member of opposition who last put upon the government's work.
Okay, so before moving on why my team specifically won this debate, I will contend why our side won this debate. And I will do this by 6 points of contention from what we heard right now and from the debate as a whole. Now firstly, we had this contention about the model we had proposed in the beginning. and banning the use of nootropics for people under 18 years old. And we clearly said in the beginning that this is to prevent parents from coercively putting them on their children. When a child is born bipolar, or when a child is born with ADHD, most often the parents will not want to see the child suffering. And what will they do? Instead of continuing to see it suffering, they will buy nootropics, they will buy these types of drugs, because they will see that this will emancipate the child from from the ADHD or from the abuse it is doing. And therefore, if we allow it for even children under 18, this means that there will be a big incentive for the parents to abuse it and coercively put it on their parents. But we say that also, we prescribe this to patients that certainly only need it. Doctors do not prescribe it to anyone just to make money. Doctors prescribe it to people who have ADHD, to people who are bipolar, and this results to specific prescriptions in the way we do with all other drugs around. So the model stands in this. And then they contested the model about how. Then they contested my extension about how if people are in the academics over the age of 18, how did they get there in the first place if they had these mental abilities? But in my extension, I clearly outlined that we are in the older education. I'm not targeting adults who are bipolar. I'm not targeting adults who are ADHD. I outlined that the problem adults have when they go on to university or when they go on to take courses to fulfill the extracurricular stuff they missed out, the problem they most often have is the problem of motivation, because their environment changes, and when their environment changes, it is very different from a child's environment, because a child's environment is very school-oriented. Once you get over the age of 18, your environment stops being as school-oriented, and it is much harder for you to get into the school. And therefore, by prescribing and allowing these nootropics for these adults, we essentially see that the adults will have a much easier time going to these courses and studying these courses. And this is good because it prevents people from being depressed. It prevents people from it prevents people from continuously regretting that they didn't take a course, and therefore on our side of the house we are providing them with an emancipation to life. No thank you. Moreover, they said that by giving these people drugs, nothing will improve, and things will actually get worse if we give it to people. Now, the reason why drugs are abused around now, what is the reason? It is because they're put under the table. It is because people do not know what they are about, and it is because people like to experiment and see what effect they will have on themselves. Now, when we draw the nootropics under the table, we will see a lot of adults, we will see a lot of people just taking them to see for the effect it has. Whereas if we do legalize them and if we do allow them, we will see media portraying the effects they have, we will see doctors being able to outline the effects they have, and we'll see society condoning what is going on with these drugs. And essentially, we'll get rid of all these people that would experiment with these drugs and go up and just do it for the sake of it. And therefore, abuse will decrease as a whole.
Sir.
Now, no thank you. And then they had the extension of that the rich will only use it. But let me pull up the analogy again, as we talked about in opening and later on, that the painkillers after World War I, they were also only allowed for the rich people. They were also very expensive and only allowed for the rich people. But after World War II, what happened? We drew the painkillers out into the open, we put them into markets, we allowed companies to sell them, and we allowed the companies to make money of them. What was the result? A decrease in prices and an increase of people that are able to take them, but moreover what we saw was that people learned which painkillers they could use, what effects these painkillers would have, because it was out in the open and they could see what the effects were. Go ahead.
Yes, on painkillers. Painkillers are there to resolve a harm that can be solved in a natural way. The mental capabilities can be resolved by learning process.
Breaking a bone, having a fracture in the bone is very painful, and it takes, okay, naturally it'll take 4 weeks to mend, but you don't want to have 4 weeks full of pain. In the same way, you don't want 3 years in university full without motivation. We see that painkillers and nootropics are analogous, and their effects will be the same. No thank you. And then we say that everybody will need it, and everybody will need it in our society. And now, in our model, we clearly said that it's only under 18, but even if this was the case, I clearly outlined that people with labor-intensive work, people who do not need motivation in their environments or in their academics, will not want to go and take these nootropics, will not want to abuse them, because it doesn't have the effect they want to reach. Whereas we will see that those with mentally intensive works and those that need to solve complex mental problems, those are the people that will use it, and we will not see an entire society forced to use it. No thank you. And then we said that we need, yeah, and those were the contentions. So now moving on to why my side won this debate exactly. And now we saw that the we saw that opening talked about how it will be beneficial for society and how we need a society that will move on and go on academically. But I talked about why exactly we needed this in our society. Why exactly? Because we want as a society to replace our natural instincts, our natural work for the work of robots, for the work of computer programs in order to develop. But where exactly is this required? We need to take these nootropics in the terms of more specifically academics, in terms of more specifically when we want to get an education, when we get a role. Why is this? Because it is more emotionally close to us if we are those suffering rather than a society as a whole suffering, and rather than a society as a whole being drawn back. No, thank you. Rather than a society as a whole being drawn back by these people. And they also talked about how disabled people need the nootropics because this will get them back into society. But I further developed this, talking about how the people that are bipolar, the people that do have ADHD throughout their entire life, will be ostracized by society much more than if they do take these drugs and later on not take these drugs and perform in various ways. It is a much higher burden of being ostracized when you have to live with ADHD from birth all the way through life than if you can have swaying and fluctuating performances based on these drugs. And moreover, I provided you with 2 extensions, talking clearly about how by allowing this, we will provide everybody the access to it. Not only the rich people, not only those who are medically interested, and not only those who know what will work with these painkillers. This is because with these nootropics. This is because it will follow the same mechanism as painkillers that I previously outlined. It will follow the mechanism that people will learn what the effects are, what the ramifications are. Doctors will learn where to prescribe it, and essentially firms and companies will want to take these the nootropics into their hands. The prices will decrease, and as a whole, we'll have a society more equal and fair society, and better off by the use of nootropics.
Thank you very much. Let's have the opposition look to close the debate.
Okay. To quote the government whip, and one of the last things he said in this debate, is that they should vote for them because they allowed for everyone. They have smaller prices, now it's going to become more available. Yet earlier in their speeches, they were talking about how they help people with disabilities, and how people with disabilities can start using this ADHD. It's very unclear on their side of the house what they actually really believe. And we've seen a clear contradiction on their side. When it helps them, like for these innovation points they've had, then suddenly the drugs are more available to the public. But when it helps them that there's less availability, such as on the abuse point, then suddenly there's less availability of these drugs. So we've heard a very clear contradiction on their side. When it helps them, there's less. When it helps them, there's more. So this is very unclear on their side of the house. So in my speech today, I'm going to be first taking a closer look at the opening sides before I move on to and take down the case before I move on to the extension that my extension speaker had. So as I said, they first talked about how the use was very limited on the model. They would only have for 18, there would be tight regulation by the government, it would have to be prescribed. And we asked several times, I tried to ask several times in the PY, how exactly is this different from the status quo? It's not. So let's assume, just from moving on from now, we're going to assume in my speech that the use is actually increased, because otherwise we see this motion as being quite irrelevant if the use is not increased, if it's just the same as the status quo. So I'll move on, leading from there. So then they talked about how this abuse point they had on their side of the house. Well, we see that that's not really going to be relevant, because the use is only going to be more, it's going to be less regulated, more people will actually be taking it, and more people will be able to abuse it. Furthermore, we talked about how it would also lead to tolerance within the people. But now moving on to the extent so because there's been a clear contradiction on this side, we believe that the opening government has not really contributed much to this debate. They've just been moving back and forth with a very unclear model. So now I'd like to move on to the closing government and what they have brought to the table today. First of all, as I said, they talked about how the people, and they had a point on how the people with disabilities are now going to have the chance to improve this. We see again that this is already happening on the status quo, so that point is quite irrelevant. But then we heard the two extension points. First of all, on how it would improve academics for adults, and second of all, how it would be more available to the people. So let's first look at how it's going to improve academics for adults. Now, we heard already in our opening opposition, we heard analysis on the short-term, long-term benefit, which I would like to develop further now. They talked about how, in the short term, we do agree on our side of the house. It's going to lead to more efficiency. The people will be able to think more clearly, and they can take, a few tests using these drugs. But in the long term, we see two possible scenarios. We see that first of all, the people could be taking them all the time now and develop reliance on them, or secondly, they only use them a few times, right? Let's look at the first one. In long term, they use them, they start using these drugs a lot. We see that they're going to start becoming dependent on these drugs. They won't really be able to do anything without these drugs. As we heard from the opening opposition, if you suddenly rely on these for debate, then when you actually have to debate without these drugs, it's very different from before. Or maybe you start developing a reliance on them, and you're not actually able to debate without them. We see that you shouldn't really be debating if you're not able to debate without these drugs. Yes?
We do this with allowing morphine. When you have a broken arm, just still be able to go to work. Or
yes, but will you continue using morphine every day of your life? We see that you can only use this in the short term. You can use them also when you actually have this problem, such as ADHD. That's when you can actually use these drugs, when you need them for medical purpose, not just for anything you would like. Because we see that certain people, as we also heard in my extended speaker, that certain people don't really belong in the places that they will end up if they'll be taking these drugs, which I'll go on to later. But let's look now at the second type, the people that only use them. The people that don't really use them a lot. We see that this is not really all these innovation points they have and how it helps society and so on. That falls because they only use them in small cases. And again, that is similar to the status quo when people use it every once in a while when they have a test. But now moving on to, then we heard the second point. So that we were taking down how to improve the academics, and I'll do that further in the extension. But moving on to how it's more available to the people, which you also heard in the extension speaker. They talked about how it would be cheaper due to high demand, and how we already saw this happen with painkillers. Well, we see that this point falls quite easily. See, the medical companies, what they want is really profits. They want profits. They've already spent a lot of money on the R&D. They've spent a lot of money on researching and developing these drugs. They've spent a lot of money on this. So see, they're not really going to be offering these drugs cheaper just like that, just because it's suddenly now prescribed for this. Yes?
No, but as demand increases and as availability increases,
yes, but we see that they have absolutely, you haven't provided any incentive for them to sell it cheaper. Yeah, sure, people will want it more, but they will still sell it for the same price and people will still want to buy the drugs. So they won't really sell this cheaper because they already spent all this money on the R&D and so on. But now moving on to the extension and how we actually, on closing opposition, have taken this debate. We had 2 points on extension. First of all, the inequity in society, and second of all, how not everyone should be taking these drugs. First of all, on the inequity, which you had no response on their side of the house. We talked about how you're limiting certain people and how you're limiting certain people that are not able to afford these drugs or are not actually willing to take these drugs. We talked about how right now, we already see rich people, mostly rich people that are able to go to universities already because, they're able to have tutors, things like that, they're able to pay the university fees. What do we see if we actually part this motion? We'll see that the richer people will be able to get an even more clear benefit because now they will be able to get these drugs, they'll be able to get these benefits. Yes?
Okay, so isn't it within the company's incentive to make it cheaper so that more clients could be using these drugs so that they would have more...
I already pointed out to you how they actually have no incentive to do this. They can just sell it at the same price and people will still be buying, specifically the richer people that will be buying these drugs. Furthermore, we see that we will actually have more people now, using these. Now moving on to now the second point of extension that we have, on now how not everyone should actually be taking these drugs. We talked about how if you actually start developing a dependence on these drugs, you use them for everything. People are going to be using them to, for example, get into university. They will use them throughout high school, and then they will get into university based on these drugs. Then throughout university, as they've been saying, people that have a hard time in university, now they can be using these drugs, right? What we say on our side of the house is what happens when these people get out of university. We see that you don't actually deserve this diploma that you have achieved through the use of these drugs. When you get a job, again, you have two choices. Either you can continue using your drugs and taking the same performance, or you can stop using them, as it seems that they only wanted people to use it throughout high school or throughout university and have a hard time. They get into a job that they can't handle because they only had this capability of getting this diploma based on the drugs that they took. The closing government also talked about how poor people or worker people won't actually want to do this. Well, we see that exactly these people are the ones that want to do use because they don't want to need these jobs to get into university and get these diplomas, you know. Imagine a construction worker. Do you not imagine that a guy like this would want to be CEO? The only thing that's limiting is the fact that maybe he doesn't have a diploma. Well, now he would be able to get one, though it would be underserved. When he's put in that position of CEO, he's going to be still relying on these drugs, and as we talked about, he's going to be developing tolerance. There's going to be several other side effects. He won't be able to think clearly when he doesn't have these drugs. So there's several disadvantages with this. We need, and again, we talked about how we actually need these people because we need certain people that are not really, you know, not everyone can be CEOs. We need certain people that are sweeping the streets. We need certain construction workers and things like this. But it's going to be encouraging them to move up to this and actually try to get in these biggest roles. And no one's going to want to take these lower positions. So because we prove how it leads to more use, clearly, and how there's been a clear contradiction on that on that side of the house, how it leads to inequity, which we heard no response on, and how not everyone should be taking it because they'll end up in positions they don't deserve, closing off